Europe is pulling out. Billions of dollars are moving in silence, and almost nobody is paying attention. $245 billion. That is how much gold is now preparing to leave vaults in New York. They are not taking it back because they fear an enemy. They are taking it back because they fear their own ally. Is the safest anchor in the world becoming the biggest risk of all? At the start of 2026, Michael Jaeger sent an urgent request to Germany's central bank. He was speaking for European taxpayers who want all of their gold brought home. His fear did not come from some distant military enemy. Michael's story is really a wake-up call for millions of people. The biggest ally is starting to look like the biggest risk. European officials have realized that the American financial system has become too unpredictable. Threats against the independence of the Federal Reserve have crossed a red line. America no longer feels like the world's safest vault. And what Michael is trying to protect is also what ordinary Americans fear most. It is the silent destruction of wealth when inflation spins out of control. When the keeper of the vault loses its discipline, a physical run becomes inevitable. For decades, financial markets lived on the illusion of rescue from the White House. Investors believed geopolitical risk could always be softened by statements and messaging. When tensions exploded, Wall Street simply waited and bought the dip. But 2026 ripped that illusion apart. An Outlook report from Apollo painted a brutal picture. The US is sliding straight into stagflation risk. That is the worst state an economy can enter. Growth stalls, but inflation keeps surging. Media promises cannot produce more goods. They cannot repair a broken physical supply chain either. Threats to interfere with Fed interest rate policy shattered the final boundary. Confidence in a stable reserve currency has started to collapse. This is no longer a normal cyclical downturn. This is a crisis at the institutional core. That is exactly why America's biggest allies can no longer sit still. A representative tied to Germany's central bank called the repatriation of gold a necessary decision. Europe needs strategic independence from the US. Moving thousands of tons of gold across the Atlantic is a security nightmare, but they are determined to do it anyway. 150 million euros in transport costs is a small price to pay for sovereignty. Europe would rather hold its assets itself than trust an unpredictable system. It does not want its national reserves to become trade hostages. This move to pull out $245 billion in gold is an unspoken verdict. America is losing its most powerful weapon of all, trust. But moving those gold bars is only the visible surface of a much larger retreat. Split screen. On one side, a US supercarrier patrols the Gulf. The cost of operating that machine of war runs as high as $333,000 per hour. On the other side, there is a sunlit balcony in downtown Berlin. Sitting on the railing is a single solar panel worth 200 euros. That contrast is not just cinematic. It is an equation that is humiliating the Pentagon. For the last half-century, America's security architecture was built on oil. The US spent billions of dollars protecting sea lanes every single day. It believed that whoever controlled energy controlled the world. Europe used to be a compliant hostage inside that system. Every shock in the Middle East sent German electricity bills soaring. But now Europe is carrying out a bottom-up revolt. This physical retreat did not begin in parliaments or ministries. It began at electrical outlets inside ordinary apartments. In Germany alone, more than 1 million balcony solar systems have already been switched on. People are not waiting for government policy. They are going to stores themselves and buying cheap 800-watt kits. You do not need to be an engineer to do this. You hang the panel over the balcony. Then you plug the cable straight into the wall outlet. The electricity automatically flows into the apartment's own grid. That level of simplicity is what turned this into a revolution. Sales data from EcoFlow exposes a very clear mindset. Over the past year, 40% of customers did not just buy solar panels, they also chose to buy the more expensive battery storage systems. Their goal was not to shave a little money off the monthly bill. They genuinely wanted to unplug from the global energy system. The Pentagon burns $333,000 an hour to protect the flow of oil, but European households can spend just 200 euros and stop needing that oil altogether. America has unintentionally forced its own allies to find another way to survive. This is the turning point of the entire story. Michael Yeager and ordinary Europeans are facing a new reality. Demanding the return of $245 billion in gold is only the first move. But keeping thousands of tons of gold underground becomes meaningless if you cannot even keep your own lights on. Physical self-sufficiency is the highest form of national security. Enormous geopolitical power is now being stripped away by ordinary citizens. Once a German household can produce enough electricity to get through the night, it stops caring about tense meetings inside OPEC. It no longer panics when oil fields catch fire. That kind of micro-independence destroys America's macro leverage. It tears apart the old power structure faster than war ever could. What happens when aircraft carriers become useless? In March of 2026, one ship captain received a request unlike anything he had ever seen. His oil tanker was approaching the Strait of Hormuz. Iran had just rejected every American ceasefire proposal. Instead, it set up what was essentially a toll booth at sea. To pass safely, the captain had to pay $2 million, but he was absolutely forbidden from using US dollars. Maritime intelligence outlet Lloyd's List confirmed the intermediary transaction. The ransom was paid entirely in Chinese yuan. That is an extremely dangerous precedent. The petrodollar dam has just shown its first crack that cannot be sealed. For 50 years, American power was built on oil. The whole world was forced to hold dollars to buy energy, but this grand system is now being attacked from both ends. On the supply side, countries are beginning to bypass pricing rules. They are ignoring sanctions and using alternative currencies. On the demand side, the biggest customers are quietly walking away. Look at the Western market. By the end of 2025, pure electric vehicle sales in Europe had jumped 52%. Danish consumers are leaving gas stations behind in large numbers. They are charging electric cars at home using wind power. These purchasing decisions completely neutralize OPEC's grip. The US military can bomb hostile energy facilities, it can send carriers to blockade sea routes, but it is powerless against a Danish citizen. You cannot use a gun to force someone to buy gasoline when that person drives an electric car. This microshift is now collapsing. Massive macro structures. The US is being left with fleets that cost staggering amounts of money. The Pentagon's weapons were designed for the 20th century, when power meant controlling strategic choke points. But now power means controlling your own grid. America spent trillions of dollars protecting its dominant position. In the end, its own unpredictability is what accelerated the collapse of that system. On the surface, this looks like a victory for Europe. It feels as though people like Michael Yeager have won total independence. It feels as though they have fully escaped Washington's reach. But the reality of this shift is much harsher. Cutting dependence on America is only half the story. The other half is a much more terrifying physical trap. Michael Yeager's self-sufficiency comes at a very high price. The money he just helped pull away from America is not staying in Europe. It is flowing straight into factories in Shenzhen. A report from the International Energy Agency reveals the truth. Those 200 euro solar panels did not rise out of German soil. They were manufactured and subsidized by China's massive supply chain. Europe is escaping the grip of America's oil system, only to place itself under Beijing's hardware dominance. 80% of Europe's solar equipment is now controlled by China. That is a brutal number for energy security. And that is the strategic equation of the next decade. If Europe keeps buying this cheap hardware, OPEC's energy weapon will be neutralized. This path to energy independence could very well be completed in less than 10 years. But the new macro supply chain is the real fatal weakness. Unless Europe and the US pour billions of dollars into domestic manufacturing, the hardware dependence will remain. And if they do build at home, electricity prices for ordinary people could triple. The most dangerous variable here is industrial capacity. Europe simply cannot manufacture enough of this equipment on its own if its economy remains trapped in stagnation. America understands this weakness very well. Even as it loses geopolitical energy power, Washington still holds another lever. A report from Hartford Funds points to the unmatched force of artificial intelligence. AI is creating a productivity engine unlike anything the US economy has seen before. America may lose control over the global energy system to its rivals, but it still writes the algorithms that could run the financial system of the future. That has direct consequences for the core economy. Audiences in the US may face higher gasoline prices and a higher cost of living, but their retirement funds may still grow because of the power of Silicon Valley. Power is splitting into two very different worlds. America dominates software. Asia controls hardware, and Europe is trapped in the middle. Then, one winter day in 2026, the inverter in Michael's home suddenly starts smoking. His 800-watt self-sufficiency system goes dark. He tries to find a replacement circuit board made in Europe, but the shelves are filled with imports from Asia. And in that moment, Michael realizes a bitter truth. Geopolitical power never disappeared. It simply moved from gas pumps to electronic circuit boards. Michael Yeager may have locked Europe's gold safely back inside the vault, but the age of dependence has officially come to an end. Power in the 21st century is not about how much wealth you can hide. It is about whether anyone still wants to remain inside your system. So what would you choose? Depend on an ally that keeps changing the rules, or hand the lifeline of your power grid to a ruthless strategic rival? The answer may come down to one question: how long will those millions of solar panels last before they start to fail?